It was a warm afternoon, with a soft breeze blowing through the trees. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting long shadows on the ground. The park, usually a peaceful place, was quiet except for the distant hum of voices and the occasional sound of children playing. A young girl sat on one of the benches near the fountain. She had her arms crossed, looking down at the ground, lost in her thoughts. She wasn't really there to socialize or make friends, but to just get away from the chaos of life. The girl had always preferred being alone, especially in public places. It made her feel safe, even if it was just for a few hours. With her head lowered, she gently traced her fingers along the cold stone of the bench. It was a simple moment, one where she could gather her thoughts in peace. However, her moment of solitude was interrupted. A sharp voice broke through the calm, making her jump. "Hey, what are you doing here?" She looked up to see a man approaching. He was wearing a police uniform, and his posture was stiff, as if he walked with a sense of authority that was impossible to ignore. The officer stopped just a few feet away from her, standing tall with his arms crossed as if waiting for a response. She felt a knot form in her stomach. It wasn't that she had done anything wrong, she hadn't, but something about the way he looked at her made her feel uneasy. I said, "What are you doing here?" The cop repeated, his voice more forceful this time. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, not with concern but with judgment. The girl swallowed nervously, trying to stay calm. "Just sitting here," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure why he was even talking to her. There were plenty of people at the park, yet he had chosen her. The officer didn't seem to care about her response. Instead, he took a step closer, his presence growing more intimidating. "You can't just hang around here all day," he said. "This is a public park, not your personal space." The girl felt a lump in her throat. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't bothering anyone. But somehow, in the officer's eyes, she was already guilty. She tried to speak up again, her voice a little shakier this time. "I'm not bothering anyone. I'm just sitting here, that's all." The officer wasn't having it. His lips twisted into a sneer as he leaned in closer. "What's the matter? Don't you have somewhere to be? Or are you just out here causing trouble?" His tone was mocking now, as if he found her presence in the park an annoyance he needed to address. The girl felt her cheeks heat up. She didn't want to make a scene, but she didn't know how to make him understand. She shook her head slightly and shifted uneasily on the bench, wishing she could just disappear. The officer's gaze grew colder, and he stepped forward again, towering over her. "You think you can just sit here and do nothing?" "I don't think so," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. The girl looked up at him, her heart racing. She didn't want to get into trouble. She didn't want to make things worse. But the way the officer was speaking to her, it felt wrong. She had every right to be there, yet he was treating her like she was a criminal. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she whispered, her voice trembling. The officer laughed, a sound that was harsh and sharp. "Not doing anything wrong? You look like you're up to something. What's your deal, huh?" She felt her eyes begin to water, but she refused to cry in front of him. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction. Instead, she stood up, hoping that maybe if she just left, it would end. But as she turned to walk away, the officer reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Where do you think you're going?" he snapped. The girl gasped, trying to free herself from his grip. But the officer's hold was firm, and it only made her feel more helpless. "Let go of me," she pleaded, panic rising in her chest. But the officer didn't let go. Instead, he yanked her back toward the bench, as if trying to assert his dominance. "You're not going anywhere until I say so," he growled. The girl felt her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to do. She didn't want to make the situation worse, but she couldn't stand being treated this way. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being treated like a criminal. Just as she was about to speak up again, a voice interrupted. "Hey, is there a problem here?" The officer froze, looking up in surprise. The girl looked up as well, startled by the sudden appearance of a new person. Standing a few feet away was a man who seemed to radiate confidence. He was tall, muscular, and dressed in casual clothes. He had a presence about him that made the officer hesitate. "What's going on?" the man asked again, taking a step closer. His tone was calm but firm, and there was an underlying authority in his voice that the officer immediately recognized. The officer didn't respond at first, unsure of what to say. The girl, still caught in the officer's grip, felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this person could help her. "Who are you?" the officer finally asked, his voice slightly defensive. The man didn't flinch. I'm just someone who doesn't like seeing people get bullied, he said. Now I'm asking you again, what's going on here? The officer, clearly caught off guard, tried to assert his control over the situation. Mind your own business, he snapped. The man smiled slightly, almost as if he were amused. It's my business when you're harassing someone for no reason, he said, his eyes never leaving the officer's. So let her go. The officer's grip tightened for a moment, but then he seemed to realize that the situation was slipping out of his control. He hesitated, finally releasing the girl's arm. The girl stood there, breathing heavily, her eyes wide with relief. She didn't say anything, but the man's presence had given her the strength she needed. She stepped back away from the officer and gave him one last glance before she walked off. Her head still spinning from the encounter. The officer stood there, looking more and more uncomfortable as the man continued to stare at him. But he didn't say anything more. He just watched as the girl left the park, her steps quick and nervous, and the man, well, he didn't move. He just stood there, quietly observing, waiting to make sure the situation was over. What he didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The girl walked away quickly, her heart still racing from the encounter. The officer had frightened her, made her feel small and powerless. She couldn't understand why he had treated her that way. All she wanted was to be left alone, to find a moment of peace. But somehow the officer had turned that simple desire into something complicated and frightening. As she made her way across the park, she tried to steady her breathing. Her hands trembled slightly and her chest felt tight, but she told herself to keep walking. She had to get away from the scene, away from the officer who had made her feel worthless for no reason. Just as she was about to leave the park, she noticed the man who had stepped in earlier, the one who had spoken up for her. He was still standing by the fountain, watching her from a distance. She hadn't realized how tall he was until now. He stood with an easy confidence, his presence commanding yet calm, like someone who was used to being in control of any situation. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should thank him. It wasn't every day that a stranger stepped in to help someone, especially when the situation had seemed so small. But it wasn't until now that she realized just how much his words had meant. The officer had been bullying her, using his power to make her feel small. But the man had stopped him just by speaking up. Taking a deep breath, she walked over to him. She wasn't sure what to say, but she felt like she needed to express her gratitude. As she approached, the man noticed her and gave her a warm, reassuring smile. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but still strong. She nodded, though the nervousness hadn't completely faded. I'm fine, thanks to you," she said, her voice a little shakier than she would have liked. The man chuckled softly. "I wasn't about to let him get away with that. No one should treat you like that. Are you sure you're all right?" She nodded again, though the memory of the officer's harsh words still lingered in her mind. "I don't know why he was like that. I was just sitting there minding my own business. I've never even met him before." The man raised an eyebrow, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. Some people just have that attitude, thinking they can push others around just because they're in charge. That's not right. He paused for a moment before adding, "I'm glad I could help, but you shouldn't have had to go through that." She smiled faintly, feeling a little better. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up. I don't think he would have let me go." "Don't mention it," the man said, shaking his head. "No one deserves to be treated like that, not you, not anyone. I couldn't just stand by and let it happen." The girl felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of relief that she hadn't even realized she needed. It was strange how just a few words from a stranger could make such a big difference. She'd always felt like an outsider, like people didn't care much about what happened to her. But this man, this stranger, had cared. "Are you sure you're all right?" the man asked again, his tone more serious now. She nodded, taking another deep breath. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little shaken up, I guess. I didn't expect that to happen." "I get it," he said, his voice softer now. "It's hard when people treat you like you don't matter. But you do matter. You're worth respect just like everyone else." She looked up at him, meeting his eyes for the first time. There was something about the way he spoke, the sincerity in his voice, that made her believe him. She had spent so much time feeling invisible, as if no one cared about what happened to her. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she mattered. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, a little embarrassed. "You don't need to say anything," he replied with a smile. "You don't owe me anything. I just want you to know that you're not alone. People care. You don't have to put up with anything less than respect." She looked down at the ground for a moment, her mind racing with thoughts. She wasn't used to people being kind like this, especially not when she was vulnerable. It felt different, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel the relief of not being judged, of not being seen as someone less important. "I've got to go," she said, after a long pause. "But thank you again, really." The man nodded, a friendly smile spreading across his face. "Take care of yourself. If you ever need help again, don't hesitate to ask. I'll be around." She gave him a small smile before turning to leave. As she walked away, she couldn't help but feel a little lighter, as if the weight that had settled on her chest earlier was slowly starting to lift. It was strange how one small act of kindness could make such a difference. For the first time that day, she felt like maybe things would be okay. The park, once a place where she'd felt small and invisible, suddenly seemed a little more welcoming. She had a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. The officer had tried to break her down, but she was stronger than that. And the man who had stepped in, who had made her feel seen, reminded her that there were still people in the world who cared, who would stand up for what was right. But as she walked out of the park and back into the world, she couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter wasn't quite over. Something told her that this wasn't the last time she'd cross paths with that officer, or the man who had come to her aid. There was more to the story, something waiting to unfold. But for now, she could breathe a little easier, knowing that at least for today she wasn't alone. The following days passed in a blur for the girl. She tried her best to push the events from the park out of her mind, but they lingered in the background, like an unfinished story that refused to fade. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the encounter with the officer, how he had treated her, how she had felt so helpless, so small. But more than that, she couldn't stop thinking about the man who had stepped in. The way he had spoken with such confidence, the way he had made everything feel safer. She didn't know why, but the memory of him stayed with her. There was something about the way he had looked at her, as if he saw her not as someone invisible, not as someone who didn't matter, but as a person worth standing up for. It was a feeling she wasn't used to, and it had made a bigger impact on her than she cared to admit. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't alone in the world. The girl had always kept to herself, preferring solitude to the chaos of social life. People were often too busy with their own problems to notice hers, and she had grown used to it. But there was something different about that man. He hadn't just noticed her, he had cared, and that made all the difference. She found herself walking to the park again a few days later. It wasn't something she had planned, but it was as though the place called to her. Maybe it was because the memory of what had happened there still felt fresh, like a chapter that hadn't yet been fully written. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but the park seemed like a safe place to think, even if it had also been where the officer had tried to push her around. As she walked through the entrance, she felt the familiar breeze against her skin. The sounds of children playing and families chatting filled the air, but the park seemed quieter to her now, more peaceful. She made her way to the same bench she had sat at before. It was empty, just as it had been the day she met the officer. For a brief moment, she considered leaving. She wasn't sure she could handle the same kind of confrontation again, but something inside her told her to stay, to face whatever memories still haunted her. She sat down, her hands resting on her knees, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the park wash over her. The wind rustled the leaves and the distant laughter of children filled her ears. It wasn't so bad here, she realized. The park was a place where people could be themselves, where the outside world seemed a little farther away. She liked that feeling. As she sat there lost in her thoughts, she suddenly heard a familiar voice. "Mind if I join you?" She opened her eyes to see the man standing in front of her, smiling. The man who had stepped in when the officer had tried to intimidate her. He looked the same. Calm, confident, and strong, but this time there was something different in his eyes, something that made her feel a little more at ease. Without thinking, she nodded. "Sure," she said, her voice still a little quiet. He sat down next to her, his presence easy and comfortable. They didn't speak for a few moments, just sitting in the silence. For some reason, it didn't feel awkward. She wasn't sure why, but it felt natural. The man seemed to know that sometimes, Silence was the best way to fill the space between two people. After a while, he spoke again. "You come here often?" he asked, his tone light and friendly. She shook her head. "Not really, I just needed to think today. It felt like the right place to be." He nodded, his eyes on the park around them. "I get that. Sometimes it's good to just find a quiet spot to clear your mind." She hesitated, but then decided to be honest. "I've been thinking about the other day. About the officer. I still don't understand why he treated me like that." The man sighed, his expression becoming more serious. "Some people get caught up in their own power, you know? They forget what it means to treat others with respect. It's easy to forget that we're all just people. But that doesn't make it right." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words. It was true. The officer had acted as though she didn't matter, as if his authority gave him the right to treat her however he pleased. And maybe for a moment she had believed him. But the man had reminded her that she did matter, that no one had the right to make her feel small. "I never thought I'd need someone to stand up for me," she said softly. "But when you did, it felt like everything changed." He looked at her, a kind smile crossing his face. "You don't have to go through things like that alone. We all need people sometimes, and you're not alone." The words felt comforting, but at the same time they made her feel a little vulnerable. She wasn't used to depending on anyone, much less someone she had just met. But for some reason it didn't feel like he was a stranger. It felt like he genuinely cared, and that made all the difference. The man shifted slightly, his voice becoming more playful. "You know," he said, "I don't think I've ever seen you around here before. You must be new to this part of the park." She chuckled softly, the sound surprising even herself. "I'm not new to the park, just new to sitting in it, I guess." He raised an eyebrow. "Well, it looks like you've got good taste in spots. I've always liked this area. It's peaceful and not too many people come around." The girl smiled, feeling a little more at ease. "Yeah, I guess it's nice to get away from everything sometimes. Not that I mind the noise, but it can be a lot." He nodded in agreement. Sometimes a little quiet goes a long way. They fell into another comfortable silence, but this time it didn't feel so heavy. The girl felt like she could breathe a little easier, as though the weight that had settled on her chest ever since the officer's encounter was slowly starting to lift. For a long time, she had felt invisible, like she didn't matter, but now in this moment, sitting next to this man who had cared enough to step in, she began to feel differently. Maybe, just maybe, she did matter. She wasn't a nameless face in the crowd, a person who could be overlooked. She was someone worth standing up for. The man glanced at her again, his eyes softening. "You know," he said, "there's more to life than the people who try to tear you down. You've got to focus on the good, the people who lift you up. Don't let anyone take that from you." She looked at him, feeling a warmth spread through her. "I think I'm starting to understand that." He smiled, standing up. "Take care of yourself, and don't let people like him make you feel small again. You've got a lot more power than you realize." She watched him leave, a small sense of peace settling inside her. The park, once a place of fear and uncertainty, now felt like a safe space, a place where she could start to rebuild. As she sat there looking out at the world around her, she realized that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. The girl returned to the park the following week, but this time, she wasn't sure what she was looking for. The memory of the man who had stepped in for her lingered, but she hadn't seen him since that day. She hadn't expected to. He was just a stranger after all, someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Still, there was something about that encounter that made her feel like she wasn't as invisible as she had always felt before. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. As she walked through the park's familiar entrance, she was struck by the same sense of calm that had washed over her the last time. The park seemed to have a way of quieting the noise in her mind, helping her feel more grounded, like a safe haven away from the rest of the world. She had come to realize that sometimes you didn't have to have all the answers. Sometimes it was okay to just sit and let the world pass by. She made her way to the same bench, the one she had sat on the day the officer had confronted her. It felt strange to be there again. The memories of the harsh words, the officer's grip on her arm, still lingered, but they didn't feel as heavy now. Maybe it was because of the man's intervention that day. His words had stuck with her, reminding her that she was worth standing up for, that she mattered. She sat down and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the park fill her senses, the rustling leaves, The chatter of families, the distant laughter of children. It was peaceful here, and she found herself feeling more at ease. She had a lot on her mind, but right now she didn't want to think too hard. She just needed to be. As she sat there lost in the moment, she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't think much of it, assuming it was just someone passing by. But then she heard a voice. "You're here again." She looked up, startled, and saw the man from the other day standing a few feet away. He was smiling, and there was a friendly glint in his eyes. She hadn't expected to see him again, but somehow it felt like fate. She smiled back, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. There was something about him that made her feel safe, even when everything around her seemed uncertain. "Yeah, I thought I'd come back," she said, her voice a little shy. "I didn't expect to see you again," he chuckled. "I don't always come to the park, but I figured I might run into you." "Glad I did." He paused, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "How have you been?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't really thought about it. She had been going through the motions of life, trying to push forward and forget the things that had bothered her. But now, with him asking, she realized she hadn't taken the time to reflect on how she was feeling. She thought for a moment before responding. "I'm okay, I guess. Better than before." She smiled slightly. "It's been hard, you know, but I'm trying." The man nodded, his expression understanding. "I get it. Life can be tough sometimes, but you've got to keep pushing forward, even when it feels like everything's pulling you back." She looked at him, surprised by how easily he seemed to understand. It was like he had been through struggles of his own. He wasn't just offering words of encouragement. There was something behind his words, something that made her feel like he genuinely cared. "I don't always know what to do," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "I've never really had someone to talk to about stuff like this. I don't even know if I'm doing the right things." "You don't have to have everything figured out," he said softly. "No one does. Sometimes it's just about taking things one step at a time, even if those steps feel small. The important part is that you keep going, even when you're not sure where you're headed." His words felt like a weight being lifted from her shoulders. She had always been so focused on having all the answers, on figuring everything out on her own. But now, with him speaking so calmly and confidently, she realized that it was okay not to have it all together. It was okay to take things one day at a time. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, just enjoying the peaceful atmosphere of the park. The breeze rustled through the trees, and the distant sounds of laughter and conversation filled the air. For the first time in a while, she didn't feel as though the world was closing in on her. She felt like she could breathe. "You know," he said after a while, breaking the silence, "I'm glad you're here. I know things haven't been easy, but it's good to see you out here finding some peace." She looked at him, touched by his words. "I don't think I would have come back if you hadn't helped me that day. I didn't think anyone would care, but you did." His expression softened, and he shook his head. "You shouldn't have to feel like no one cares. Everyone deserves someone who's got their back. And you've got me, whether you realize it or not." She felt a lump form in her throat at his words. She wasn't used to this kind of kindness, this kind of support. People didn't usually just step in like that, especially when they didn't have to. It was hard to put into words how much it meant to her. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to say it, but thank you. For everything." The man smiled, his eyes warm. "You don't need to thank me. It's just what anyone would do if they saw someone who needed help. I'm just glad I could be there." As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a soft golden glow over the park, they continued talking. They talked about small things at first, the weather, the park, how life had been going. But as the conversation grew more natural, they started to share more. She told him about her life, the struggles she had faced, the moments when she had felt alone. And he listened, really listened, without judgment, without trying to offer solutions. It was rare for her to open up like this, but with him it felt easy. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. It felt good to share her thoughts, to be heard, to not feel so invisible. And she realized in that moment that maybe she didn't have to go through life alone. Maybe, just maybe, there were people out there who genuinely cared, who wanted to make a difference. As the evening drew to a close, the park began to empty out. The man stood up and turned to her with a smile. "I've got to get going, but it was good to see you again," he said. "Take care of yourself, all right?" She nodded, feeling a sense of warmth in her chest. "I will, and thank you again. You really made a difference." He gave her a friendly wave before walking away, disappearing into the park's path. She watched him go, a sense of peace settling in her heart. As she sat there watching the sunset, she realized that things were slowly starting to change for the better. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. It had been a few weeks since that day in the park. The girl found herself thinking back to those moments often, moments when she felt truly seen and understood. She had been through so much, always carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, always feeling like she had to fight battles alone. But that man's kindness had shifted something inside her. It wasn't just the words he said, but the way he made her feel. Like she wasn't invisible, like she mattered. She wasn't sure where things would go from here. She didn't know if she'd see him again or if their paths would cross in the future. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe things could be different. She wasn't as afraid of the world anymore. And she wasn't as afraid of herself. One afternoon, as she sat on a bench in the park, she spotted the man again. This time he wasn't just walking by. He was standing near the fountain, looking as if he were waiting for someone or maybe just taking in the peaceful surroundings. Her heart skipped a beat. It felt like fate, like the universe had brought them together again. She stood up slowly, her feet carrying her toward him before she could even think twice. As she got closer, he turned and saw her. A smile spread across his face, the same kind smile that had made her feel safe before. "Hey," he greeted her, his voice warm. "I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon." "I didn't expect to see you either," she replied, a hint of nervousness creeping into her voice. "But I'm glad I did." The man's eyes softened, and he stepped aside so she could join him by the fountain. They stood there for a moment, both of them watching the water ripple as the sun began to set, casting a golden light across the park. It was a beautiful sight, and for the first time it felt like everything was falling into place. "How have you been?" he asked, his tone gentle. "How's everything going?" The girl hesitated. She had come a long way since their first meeting, but she wasn't sure how to explain it. "I've been better," she said after a moment. "A lot better, actually." The man looked at her curiously, his interest genuine. "Better? What's changed?" She smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "I think it's because I've started to realize that I don't have to go through everything on my own. I've been so used to carrying everything by myself, but now I know that there are people who care, people who'll have your back." He nodded slowly, as if he understood exactly what she meant. "It's hard to let people in, isn't it? But once you do, it's like the world suddenly becomes a little less heavy." She agreed with him. Letting people in had always been difficult for her. She had been so afraid of being let down, of trusting the wrong person. But now she could see how much strength there was in opening up, in allowing others to show up for you when you needed them the most. "It's not easy," she said quietly. "But I'm trying. I think I'm learning." He smiled warmly at her, clearly proud of the progress she had made. "You're doing great. It takes time, but it's worth it. And you don't have to do it all at once." For a moment they were silent again, just standing there together, watching the world go by. The air was crisp, the park was peaceful, and it felt like time had slowed down just for them. She didn't know how long they stood there, but it felt right, like this was where she was supposed to be. Eventually the man spoke again. "I've been thinking about something," he said thoughtfully. "About how you're doing and where you're headed." She turned to look at him, curious. "What do you mean?" He smiled a little, as if he were choosing his words carefully. "I've seen a lot of people go through difficult times, and I've noticed something. It's not the struggles we face that define us, it's how we respond to them. How we choose to move forward. I think you've got something in you that's going to carry you through whatever's next." Her heart warmed at his words. She hadn't thought about things that way before. She had always seen herself as someone who was constantly battling, always trying to keep up with the weight of the world. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about the battles at all. Maybe it was about how you responded, how you chose to keep moving forward no matter what. "I'm not sure I'm there yet," she admitted softly. "I'm still figuring things out. But I feel like I'm getting closer." He nodded, his expression understanding. "That's all anyone can do. You're already on the right track just by showing up for yourself. You've got to give yourself credit for that." She smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that hadn't been there before. "Thanks," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "That means more than you know." As they stood there, the sky beginning to darken as the sun set completely, She realized that she didn't feel the same fear that she had once felt. She had spent so much time looking over her shoulder, waiting for something bad to happen, always bracing herself for the next obstacle. But now she was starting to believe that maybe things didn't always have to be so hard. Maybe she didn't always have to be on guard, always expecting the worst. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked suddenly, surprising herself with the question. The man looked at her for a moment, then shrugged, a slight grin on his face. "I think about it sometimes, but mostly, I focus on what's right in front of me. Life's unpredictable. You never know where it's going to take you, so it's better to just enjoy the ride and take it one step at a time." She smiled, feeling more at peace than she had in a long time. He was right, of course. Life was unpredictable. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the unpredictability was what made it interesting. "I like that," she said, her voice lighter. "I think I'll try to do that. Just take it one step at a time." They both stood there for a while longer, lost in the quiet beauty of the park, each lost in their own thoughts but connected by the understanding between them. Eventually the man looked at his watch and sighed. "I should get going, but I'm glad we ran into each other again." "I'm glad too," she replied with a smile. "Thanks for everything. You really helped me more than you know." He nodded, a look of contentment on his face. "Take care of yourself, all right? Don't forget what we talked about." "I won't," she said, her heart full. "I won't forget." As he walked away, disappearing into the park's winding paths, she watched him go, a small sense of peace settling within her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time she felt ready to face it. She knew that no matter what came her way, she had the strength to handle it, and she wasn't alone anymore. The park, once just a quiet place to escape, had become something more. A reminder that sometimes the right person at the right time can change everything.